I'm so honored today to speak to CBS Mornings co-host Tony Dokoupil. Tony, these stories about America's history of housing discrimination demonstrate how decades later, families are still reaping the consequences of that. And there were barriers to families trying to grow generational wealth, barriers that, didn't affect your family, didn't affect my family either.
Yeah. So, I mean, the real background for this story, this set of stories, is an earlier report I did on wealth inequality in America. I remember, if you recall, I bought a bunch of pies.
This is the American pie.
Went to a mall in New Jersey and asked people how they thought the pie of wealth in America was divided up, and people were shocked at the gaps. In fact, from the lowest to the highest.
90% of the wealth is right here in the top.
And so then the follow-up naturally was, well, are there even more distinctions we can make? And so you begin to talk about race. What's the big difference between people in different categories? And it turned out that there's years and years and years of research showing that the typical white family has between 8 and 10 times the family wealth as the typical Black family. So then we started doing a couple stories about like why that is, and the answer, other than the big answer of racism, is real estate. To our words, and I don't know. It just occurred to me one day that my family probably benefited from some of these policies because we're a New York family and this is a big old area, and that's what led me to New Jersey and the idea of actually going to my grandfather's home county where he raised my father and my aunts and uncles, and talking to people there about whether they knew what happened there, whether there was awareness, and then if there was, what should happen now.
Wait a minute, you're telling me they were only going to mortgage white people?
And those are like the key conundrums, I think, in our country. Are you aware of X, Y, and Z? And if you are made aware or are aware, what do you do about it? The answer may be nothing, but what do you do about it?
Well, and Tony, it's incredible because CBS did a story with the Rochelle's, of course, back in the 1960s. Who made that connection between the fact that your grandparents were actually home buyers in that same community just a decade earlier?
So when I started looking into my grandparents and their property records in Bergen County, New Jersey, I became really, really, really interested in the New York City suburbs in general, and the federal support for those suburbs and how the money was allocated. And in the course of doing that research, I found a copy of this old CBS documentary, and somebody put it on YouTube illegally, violating the copyright. However, that's how I found it. So then I went to our actual archives to dig it up. And after I did the piece about my grandparents, it was natural to tell the inverse story. So, okay, here's the white Italian family that has a kind of classic American tale. What about a family that didn't get into the county, that didn't get the schools and the real estate appreciation? How did their life go? And the little girl from that documentary, Alicia, is who we ended up finding. And we were able to update their story. It's disheartening to see the documentary and then satisfying to find her and be able to give people kind of closure on what happened.
Right, and Tony, you had an incredible interview with Alicia, and I wanted to ask you, is there anything from that interview with her that you couldn't include in this story, but that also really stuck with you?
So, I mean, there's lots of complexity here. I mean, really what both of these stories are about is the question of reparations, which is another R word that people don't want to get into. Sometimes it comes up politically. There's a study in Congress right now about whether we need to do something like reparations. This is money for the harms of slavery and continued discrimination. Polls are against it nationally, and you sometimes hear people say things politically like, it's ancient history. So what these stories really demonstrate is that, well, when it comes to who has and who has not, it's not ancient history. It continues to this day because wealth is cumulative. But what's remarkable is you put the question to the white Italian neighborhood, my grandfather's old neighborhood, and you say, okay, you guys benefited, these other people did not. What do we do about that fact? And they say, I don't know. I guess we just move on. Alicia also does not know. She doesn't feel 100% comfortable with the idea of like just a transfer of wealth. But on the other hand, she does recognize that her family's financial trajectory went on a different course because of what happened in Bergen County. So it speaks to the overall discomfort I think Americans have with the idea of making good when it comes to who has what. And so that's a big takeaway for me is polls show overwhelmingly white Americans don't want reparations. Most Black Americans do, but there's a significant portion who either don't know or say flat out no. And Alicia is in that category of people who is like, not really sure. Now, also to be fair, we found her. She wasn't looking for us. We said we found this old documentary and then we found her. It's not like she's been studying this and thinking about this and being angry about this for decades. She's been living her life. So maybe as she reflects, she'll come to a different conclusion. But I was struck by how ambivalent she was about the bigger context here.
Well, and then at the end of the story, and I think this is so important, there's a call to action as Americans that we need to acknowledge that this happened in our country so many years ago and that we're still seeing the impact of that so many years later. And again, going back to that question, you're asking, what are we going to do about it? Do you have any thoughts on any answers to that question?
I mean, what I think, I believe in the democratic process. So, and I think journalistically, what we do is put the clearest, most focused information out there for people to participate in that democracy. And so what I hope these pieces demonstrate is the effect of discrimination continues today to impact people's wallets. History shows up in your wallet today. That is a fact that cannot be disputed. Now, what we should do about that will be worked out among our politicians in the democratic process. And I have endless faith in the wisdom of the American people collectively. So do I have any ideas? No, but will I participate in the political process with everyone else? Yes, and I'm sure we'll get there in the end.
All right, Tony, on that note, thank you so much for taking some time to talk with me today about this story and for sharing all of these stories of these people.
Thank you very much, Katie. I appreciate it. Great to be with you.
Great to be with you. Alicia's interview and the article, How Past Housing Discrimination is Still Affecting American Families, are all available on cbsnews.com. Make sure you check it out. I'm Katie Johnston for CBS Local News.